through that.
It's 10:01, so I
Do we have a quorum?
So just to quickly, health and safety, the exits are the highway and in front, and in the event of an emergency, please assemble in the car park front there and stay there until such time as you're given the all clear. Just a reminder for everyone, please turn their mobiles off. Right. So firstly, apologies. I've got apologies from Councillor Calenso and Councillor Gibson. Apologies. Hello. All in favour to accept the apologies?
No.
Thank you, Brenda. Seconded. Thank you, Alex. Right, moving on to are there any conflicts of interest today? No? Right, and right, so we move on to A3, public participation. Talk to us, so you've got 5 minutes to talk to me. And if there's any questions of clarification, thanks for coming along.
Namihi o te rā, tēnā koutou katoa. When I saw that you were discussing OIAs today and a report had been requested, I was interested that you were taking the community's need for information seriously. Thank you. I looked at the February 2021 meeting, and one might be forgiven in thinking that this was not a repeat requester report, but a repeat offender report. From the good comment, when there was no participation announced, and comments such as innocent, vexatious, repeat requesters, let's name them. Actually, it fell short of shame and name, but the suggestion was there. They should be charged. At first I thought this meant arrested, but it was said with such vigour, but then I realised no, it meant money. The smart ones changed the topic. What the hell? You're talking about members of the public, the press, and your constituents asking for information to understand and participate in public activities. Yes, maybe to keep an eye on what council's doing. Yes, maybe to check on your facts. This is part of the work of council, not something that slows you down and should be treated with disdain. As a possible repeat offender, I thought I'd give you a little insight from my perspective. But my words may not have the same respect as a first-timer or an average person. However, let me tell you, the average person does not ask the questions in the first place. For each question you get, there's probably 20 or more who wish they'd asked or wanted to ask, but don't have the same access, for example, as I do. So this report, turnaround time. As NZTA say, 100 is not a target. 20 days is not a target, and yet I suggest it's the actual, regardless of how complex the answer is. I'd suggest delaying responses for 20 days takes small stories, small concerns and issues, and turns them into even bigger ones. But you don't ask for time to respond in your report or customer satisfaction. Quality of information. My experience is that if you ask what colour something is, you're told it's square. If you ask for a breakdown of a number, you're told 8. If you ask for a delivery date, you're told soon. This could be improved, and yet you don't want to see the quality of any of the answers. Follow-up requests. Rather than vexatious, I'd suggest follow-up requests are because the answer was not given. Being vague, incorrect, or confusing, you create extra work for yourselves. Maybe ask how much of the follow-up work is due to incomplete responses. Self-generated. I'd ask that you state your references and your sources when making statements, and then there would be no need for an OAI. Would you expect if a statement is made, the project is on time, and yet the public still see a hole in the ground? Maybe somebody will ask for the project timeline. Refer to the timeline and where it can be found in a publicly available council paper. If, however, the fact is not a fact but hyperbole, then state so. I'm making this up for effect. Information requests are treated as OAIs, and they really are the same thing. Just some people don't know the terminology. Do you think that maybe this was suggested by the regulators due to a lack of regard to generally answering the public's questions? And it was felt that putting a process, the OAI process, in place, the questions would not get lost in the system. In November 2019, a quote, "The Ombudsman has recently completed a number of investigations into LAGOIMA compliance. There are strong recommendations for Council to adopt proactive release policies to promote engagement, transparency and openness." This was in an email from the Chief Executive in response to my request to publish OAI questions and answers online. I thought it would add to your desire to be open, transparent Council and possibly save costs in duplication. I followed up in February 2020 and I was told there was concern with privacy. People, these are OAI, by definition, it's public information, or it wouldn't be released. It was too hard. A database of documents is not the highest level of computer programming. In 2020, I was told it was in progress and part of the web page rewrite. But I see no reference in today's paper, so after 20 months, I do apologise, but I have to repeat myself. What's happening to a publicly available database of OAIs? Your paper states it's to decide if there's a better way to provide information more frequently in a more accessible way to reduce the need for individuals to request information under the Act. But I don't see any options or ideas given to promote this lofty aim. Thank you.
Does anybody have any points of clarification that they wish to? Brenda?
Thank you, Chair. Daphne, thank you for presenting that. It's giving us a lot more things to think about, and possibly what would you like to see happen?
Addressing those issues. What is your turnaround time? What's your quality of response? Why are they generated in the first place? Why are you making sweeping statements with no supporting information? And why are they not publicly available?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm wondering if we can get an action around those points.
They will be for consideration later. Councillor Vickery, do you have a question?
And can we have a copy of the? Yeah, thank you.
And I would suggest you go back to minute 25 on for the last for the FAR report in February, where those are direct quotes of how you were talking about ratepayers.
Thank you, Daphne. Much appreciated. Okay, so A4, actions and public participation. So in the first instance, we will table Daphne's letter and then I'll refer it to Karen to look at how we can approach this.
Are we going to put it in as an action report or as an action item? Or
It's all work's already been done in this area, but maybe Karen, you might like to make a comment.
Yeah, when we go through the report, I can respond to Daphne's points as much as I can, and then if there are any residual actions coming from that, we can know that.
and when can we expect that report?
Sorry.
Sorry, when can we expect that?
We will discuss it when it's comes up.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay, so moving on to A5 extraordinary business. So this relates to the remuneration for councillors. I take it everybody's read that report. So, does anybody have any comments before you?
You just need to add it to the agenda by resolution first.
Oh, that's right. Okay. So this is a proposed resolution to add the rates remuneration of councillors to the agenda. And do I have somebody to second that? Thank you, Gary. And all in favour?
Aye.
Do you want to talk us about this first, Katrina, and then we can?
So we do that first, Karen, so saying sorry?
Just go to you, but do it.
Yeah,
or
you want to
do
do it
that.
then?
Yeah, to do that. There's a couple of comments that I'll touch on.
Yeah, so I can run through it if you like, and then we can bring it up. So the Remuneration Authority every year reviews obviously the remuneration of elected members, but also allowances. And it sets the maximums that can be applied. And I've just highlighted through here to you through sections 2, the background, but also through sections 3, the things that have changed and potentially that need your decision around. So 3.1.1 is around hearing fees. So the Remuneration Authority allows for fees up to $100 per hour for chairs and $80 for other members. Previously, Council has agreed in previous years that this should only be $78 for chairs and $50 for other members. So one of the recommendations today needs to be around whether we want that to continue or whether you want to change that. Travel time allowances. Previously, the Remuneration Authority allows $37.50 an hour for travel time. Previously, Council has decided not to take that allowance up. So this is your opportunity to review that and decide whether that is what you still want to do or whether you want to bring that in. Communication allowance, I've got a table of the changes that have been that are part of the decision, the determination. The determination allows for an uplift of $960 per year in elected members' communication allowances. The most notable being, well, you can see actually the majority of them have gone up. They've all gone up, and I've also bought an ICT consumable, so that's around your printer cartridges and your paper to print. And then the remuneration changes are all around 1.5% figure uplift from the. That's it. So I'll open it up to questions that any of you may have. I know that Leah has one.
Yeah, just want to make a couple of comments. So just in terms of the budget for the uplift in annual salaries, has that been?
We included a 1.5% uplift.
Okay. I've also had a question from Councillor Plummer regarding the hearings rate. Now we propose $78 for a chair and $50 for a non-chair. He would like it to be the same as members from Carterton and Masterton, and I only found out this yesterday, so.
And I haven't had a chance to.
No, I spoke to Katrina this morning about it, but she's going to look into that, so I don't know, be interested in your thoughts on that, whether you think that's important or whether we should pursue that. So that was just lining it up with Carterton and Masterton. So I just open up the floor to any questions.
Just for clarification, through you, Madam Chair, Katrina, where does the money come from for these additional costs, or the additional
Communication, as I've mentioned, the uplift in the remuneration is in the budget.
is in the LTP budget?
Yeah. However, the uplift in communication in the allowances is not.
So was that actually stated in the LTP that we were going to do this?
Do what?
Have the additional one?
No, not at all, because this determination hadn't come out. It was actually just a across the board as we apply to an uplift to our salary figures for annual increases in remuneration. So it was part of that package.
So part of the LTP included the fact that we could give ourselves a pay rise.
If I could comment on that, we don't give ourselves a pay rise, we're unable to decline it. My understanding is set by a separate government remuneration authority. I think it was reported in the paper that we were unable to decline what the remuneration authority had said.
And that percentage increase would be included, as Katrina said, in the general uplift in salaries, which includes elected members.
The uplift in allowances, however, was
So effectively, the pay rise is set in concrete, regardless of whether we agree to it or not.
no.
But if we don't agree to it and we said no to it, then what? How do we not have the pay rise?
We are unable to decline by law.
So when we see in the newspaper, councillors vote for a pay rise for themselves,
Yes.
we've got no choice about that.
I believe we do. This is the remuneration authority determination sets the maximum that can be allocated. Certainly if councillors didn't want to take the remuneration authority's advice,
Yes, I would love to that clarified, actually.
Yeah, that wasn't how it was reported in the paper.
My understanding was that we didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
I'd like to get, perhaps suggest that we investigate that further.
so this is a recommendation anyway, which will need to go to council.
Needs to go to.
So we can do that in the process between now and taking it to council as to whether it's the remuneration part of the determination is you have to take that up and on.
Yeah, I'd just like to know what our options are, because what's the point in having a meeting to discuss something that we are already going to get regardless?
Well, some of it is discretionary though. If
The allowance.
the allowances are discretionary, but
Yeah. That I
the
get.
fees, the meeting fees are not.
Yeah.
So part of it is.
So from today's meeting, we would just make recommendations. All of this has to be passed to the full council meeting.
Yeah.
So there is some.
Yeah. So we can go away and investigate whether it's compulsory that councillors take that uplift in remuneration. That's not a problem. We can definitely do that. But so what therefore we need to discuss is whether you want to recommend that the allowances around the allowances. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I'm just trying to think back to the COVID days where Jacinda determined that, well, Jacinda Ardern decided that she would take a pay cut.
So just to be clear, are we talking about allowances?
That the revenue.
Or the
Yeah.
split pay? So I think let's just separate those two issues out. So from what I'm hearing from you, you want a bit more robustness around the detail.
I don't.
So the other question to determine would be, could individual councillors choose to accept or decline? So that would be another question for us. So I think let's put that back to.
Well, I think that is what we are asking. Can councillors decline? That's what you're asking.
I believe so.
So
Thanks.
let's take that, thank you, Brenda.
Yeah.
And move that back to Katrina.
And that will be reported at the council meeting.
Yep, that will go back to the council. So then just thinking about 3.1.3, the communications allowance. I just want to make a personal observation that my costs far exceed previous allowance, and in my view it's entirely reasonable. But maybe around the table, Ross, have you got some comments around allowances for?
Yeah, I'm sure they're quite reasonable and proper. However, it's a matter of perception and reputational risk too. I think in the current climate where there is considerable heat over a very large rates increase, it is unwise of us to accept any uplift in councillor and community board remuneration, regrettably. But I would urge you that we don't accept to the extent that we're possible, that we're able.
Good point. Alex?
I'd be the same.
And Gav?
Yeah, the only, I totally agree with all that. The only thing I'm concerned about is the hearing fees, because if the other councils go up, we just.
So if we can just focus on the allowances for the moment, you're happy to say we just consider
Keeping them the same?
as previously. And Brenda, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree. Thank you very much, Ross, for saying that.
So we'll have a look at that in the voting, and then we just go on to the other point, Gareth, regarding aligning our fees with councils. So what is it?
I'd like to not be able to do it. I'd like to not be able to do it, because we actually often go to regions together, and you sort of sit there saying, why they accept them or not. I mean, I'm assuming they have, but I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Anybody else got any comments on that? Sorry, Alex.
I think the council made a comment regarding having to be an accredited person on some of the committees, but the council did pay for that accreditation, whether it was fair given the time that they took off work to do that. I just think that's a factor we put into that. We say is there, because there's an extra standard required, has that been at the cost of the elected official to get that accreditation? Just a
And
comment.
that's another interesting to know whether, I'm assuming Carter and Master would pay for the extra accreditation.
I don't know.
I don't. So there's quite a lot of questions that are coming out of this.
So what are we saying therefore is that
We need to gauge.
Yeah, what's going on?
what other councils are doing?
If we're taking that approach, then we'd need to find out what they're doing,
Exactly.
what their reasoning is behind it.
So if I can then, so just remembering that this is just our recommendations that go through to council, we're not deciding today, it's not set in concrete. But if I can just, if anybody got any other further questions or comments or observations?
Through you, Kit, from your observation and your point of view, what are your thoughts?
I think seeing what other councillors around the region have been paid is a good start.
And do you agree with us maintaining the current consumable allowance? Kit?
I think Ross's was pretty good.
Okay, so I'm going to go through the recommendations and we will alter some of them as required. Yes. So firstly, I'd like to recommend we receive the local government members' determination 2021 report. Can I have a second for that? Thank you, Brenda, and all in favour?
Aye.
So this next one is with this. We recommend.
We need to change the recommendations at the top there. Yes.
We recommend to council that the proposed hourly rates for hearing fees be subject to further investigation with Carterton District Council and Masterton District Council.
With the intention of aligning them.
With the intention of aligning them.
Yeah. Suzanne, what have you got there?
Yes, that's right. So can I have a second for that? Thank you, Ross. All in favour?
Yep.
So the next recommendation, so we didn't fully discuss this, but previously we've not had a travel allowance. So that is an hourly allowance, for example, to get from Martinborough to Carterton for a meeting. I think previously it was considered
Yeah,
business
mileage.
as usual, and that's what you paid, so you're all happy with that, Renee?
Oh, and it's very hard for clarification, is that we keep the mileage as opposed to
So
the
no, it's
hourly?
not mileage, it's an hourly rate.
The mileage would still be claimable.
Yeah, but it's an hourly rate for someone to travel, so it's a hourly rate for the person.
Is that new?
We've never.
So we've never
We
adopted
never-
it before.
Oh,
Because it had to be over an hour, so therefore it's not that many places, so it's only affects if you're going to say to one.
comes and goes.
Yeah.
So it's basically we're keeping it exactly the same as we've done in the past. So I'd like to recommend to council to confirm that we will not adopt the RA's option of elected members claiming a travel allowance of $37.50 per hour after the first hour of travel on business for the 2021-22 year.
So just a point of clarification with regards to that, we can say no to that, but we can't say no to the pay
Well,
rise.
that's what we need to
We don't know.
clarify.
I need to clarify.
We're trying to find out.
Okay, we need to clarify.
So can I have a seconder for that motion? Thank you. Alex. All in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. So we all agreed that we will maintain the current allowance for communication allowance. We're all happy with that?
That resolution is the same option.
Recommend to, we recommend to council that they do not adopt the RA's proposed communication allowance of $2,150 per year per councillor for the 21-22 financial year, increase from brackets increase from 1,190 as the previous financial year. So can I have a second? All in favour?
Aye.
Right. So we need to change this to.
No, yeah, it's still, this is still, number 5 still stands, I think, because we're still paying it monthly. That's just to clarify. to people that
So
it's
we
going
don't
to be
need
paid.
to. So we recommend to council that we further investigate possibilities of proposed remuneration from 1st of July 21. And
So are we recommending that we're not adopting it if the recommendation, if the determination allows? Or,
sorry, not clear. I think councillors require more information in order to adopt a recommendation. And so that we would get that information from you prior to the council meeting. Whether we're able to refuse
Well,
individually
it
or
will be
not.
discussed at the council meeting, won't it?
Yeah.
When the report's taken, it will be discussed then.
I think you're deferring a decision to the council meeting. That's what we're doing. Yeah, a decision by council.
Okay, and that all the information fall under that at the council meeting. So we recommend to council that we defer the decision until the council meeting on proposed remuneration. So can I have a second for that? Thank you, Brenda. And all in favour?
Aye.
So that was a bit protracted.
Do you want this note in the minutes? Just if we do it.
That's okay. If we can have a mover to note that communication allowance will be paid monthly from August 21, covering the period up to the date of the local government election for current councillors. You in a second? That's all. Favour? Right. Thank you. That's right.
Well, actually, it's quite interesting. I think with the government's support, all the money must be allocated during the year, mustn't it? So,
Yeah, look, that was my understanding, but we'll have to go. Look, we'll have to go back. I'm unsure, actually. So I think I don't want to.
If you remember that there's a pool of money allocated.
But the pool was fully allocated
last year.
prior years, so I'm not, it's unclear whether they'll increase that.
But
So that's what we need to look at.
If you budgeted in for an uplift of 1.5%, that will be fixed.
I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, so I'll investigate and bring it to council.
Okay. Right, so moving on, so minutes for confirmation, Finance Audit and Risk Committee minutes of 16th of June. Has everybody had a chance to look at the minutes? Yes. So I'd like to propose a resolution of the minutes of the Finance Audit and Risk Committee meeting from 16th of June 21 are confirmed as a true and correct record. I was seconded. Thank you, Gary. All in favour?
Aye.
Right, so moving on to B1, we've got the corporate services report. Katrina, and then any questions that flow out of that?
Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you. So firstly, there's no financial statements this month. That's because we're in our year end and we're finalising our 30th of June year end accounts. So they will be presented in time next year, at the next bar, because the next bar will be before the adoption of the annual report. Yeah, so you'll get to see some draft reports. I know I'll have to check that actually, because I don't think they're supposed to, that they can be publicly available until it's been adopted, so.
And in the past, we've had a special extraordinary meeting.
So they're due to be adopted at the council meeting of the 27th of October. And at the moment, all going to plan, that will happen. Audits again have had an extension to the 31st of December to get all of the annual reports through. And that's because of the shortage in auditors. They are still at the moment on track to deliver ours by the 27th of October. However, it's a bit of a moving target at the moment, and we can't guarantee that will happen. It may be a little bit later, a week or so later. That's adopted.
It's a little bit out of our control, to be honest.
Yeah. So when will we get the next financial report?
The next financial report, we can produce a financial report next bar, but it will be for this current financial year.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, so
investments in term deposits. We've had no exceedances to the 30% rule. From the 1st of July, that changes to 50% because the new policy will come into effect. But this is reporting for May and June.
That answers one of my questions.
Troy's a little bit behind the eight ball.
yeah, so can I ask a question about that? So with those increase in rates or in interest, how do you see that? Is that look?
In terms of the increase in interest rates that we're getting on term deposits, they're increasing very slowly still at the moment. So in terms of revenue, they won't have too much effect on that. But we had anticipated a slight uplift in interest rates in the long-term plan.
So going on to the rates arrears.
Yep. So they've increased $23,000 from the previous year. So Kirsty's gone through and mapped out from over a longer time period, so you can actually see it more clearly what that looks like. One thing to note with Greytown is that because Greytown, as you can see, is significantly higher than the other towns, there is a reason for that, and it will be at least partially resolved very shortly. We've got a couple of ratepayers that that will be clearing that shortly.
That that primarily relates to property in Greater that's currently apprehended.
Can't comment on that. What I can comment on is to say that arrears amount will come down. Rates outstanding for the current year. At the end of this year, so the end of 30th of June, it's 214,000. So that will then flip over next year to the arrears amount. So at the moment, as of 30th of June, 29th of June, it's overdue, but it flips into the arrears amount. So that will be shown on the next report. Total rates outstanding, so that's for the current year's total rates, has actually decreased from the same month last year. And that's reflected, the arrears is our challenge, because they are people that are in, generally speaking, people that are that obviously continuously do not pay their rates, so they are ones that we are obviously actively looking at.
With regards to that, when you say actively not, or is it actively unable to pay the rates?
Each person is individual, and each person has different reasons. And so you can't just make a blanket statement and say people can't pay the rates. Sometimes it's not about something that's even within their control. One of the ones that we've got on our books at the moment is in a state that is literally taking years to resolve. So they can't pay their rates because it's caught up in
Legals.
Yeah. Right, sorry, continuing on. The number of rateable properties with outstanding has decreased as well, which so you know, there's some really positive I think things coming out of where we were sitting with our overdue amounts. Kirsty has had a large uplift in the amount of rates rebates that people have been applying for. So we've had a big uplift in the applications that we've received so far for rates rebates, which is really good. So that's a DIA scheme targeted at low income ratepayers. So that's really good to see. And we're increasingly getting more and more yes.
So if they're going for the rates rebates, that gives a clear indication of how many people are in that lower bracket.
It's an indication of people within our community who are eligible to apply for it.
So do we know what those numbers are?
What numbers?
Of who's eligible to apply for
Well, no, we don't, because we don't know people's incomes. I don't know your income. You don't know my income. It's based on income, and we don't know our ratepayers' income.
It's quite a set criteria to do the rates remission.
Yeah.
It's based on income.
It's basically.
And there's a set amount for a single person, couple, etc. So
It'd just be, I suppose, good to get an understanding of what that criteria is, and then perhaps publishing that to our communities.
We actively put it on our Facebook page.
and it's on every rates bill.
Yeah.
It's right in the rates newsletters.
It's in the newsletter.
Yeah.
Do you not think it should be on the website as well?
Well, sorry, and of course it's on the website as well.
And it goes out with every single rates letter, it goes out on the back and also on the newsletter.
And Kirsty specifically talks to people about their eligibility if they phone her. For whatever reason, she always discusses that with them, if there is this DIA scheme available. Yep. Liability insurance renewal. So there's a letter attached about this in the report. Effectively, our insurers, and these are the underwriters of our insurance policies, are tightening up on the wording of clauses around water tightness. I think it is fair to say, and they are limiting the amount of cover or the amount of their exposure to any risk around water tightness. So we are in actually a really good position. It doesn't seem like it, but we have cover of up to 500,000 per year for any water tightness issues. I just wanted to bring this to the committee's attention that we do have limited cover for water tightness claims. We're not aware of any. It's just that it's a change, and so effectively it's a change to perceived change anyway to the risk that we take with insurance. It's reflective of the insurance market. They're very nervous about a lot of things, and that's reflected in the uplift in the insurance premiums.
Currently, you're not aware of any claim historically going back.
We were involved with the Ministry of Education claim, but that has now been settled.
And because 500,000.
It's not much.
Not a lot.
Not much.
No, it's not, and that's cumulative over the year.
Yeah.
So it's not much at all.
That's total.
Yeah.
So, but on that, so there's only been one claim over the last, when did the leaky claims?
Well, that's right. And that's what the Ministry of Education claim was all about, and it involved, I think, councils, and that was resolved, and it was resolved in last year's annual. So one could say that our risk is low, given that there's only been one generalised. Correct.
So,
But your forward mitigation is
Yep.
the rigor of your building control function.
Yeah, exactly.
I was just highlighting that to you, just so that you're aware.
Can I just ask another question in terms of the court case that they talk about? So what is your feeling about that? Obviously, the judgment hasn't come out, but is it likely to change? They're concerned about the word.
This is why they're changing the word, because the whole reason why Napier City Council was able to challenge was the wording, and then tightening up on the wording.
But if the
But the indication from the insurance company is that the insurance company will fight any claim. Rigorously.
yeah, surprising. So has anybody else got any questions around the insurance?
That's the end of my report. If there's any other questions.
So any other questions?
How are we doing with the risk register?
It will be presented at the next meeting. We update the operational register, goes to the ELT, the executive leadership meetings once a month, and is reviewed and updated, and it will be presented at the next month.
Are there any changes that you can see to the risk register?
There's nothing I think that is significantly or materially different. What's been presented previously.
Come up with the first. Thank you.
can I just make a comment that I'll go back onto the rates before we move on this, but the number of properties with the rates graph is looking very good, and it should be commended, because a high value, one person with a high value can skew numbers, but
Correct.
we're actually looking at actual
That's right.
physical numbers.
Yeah. Number of properties.
It's looking as good as it's done since over the last 3-4 years.
Yeah, and number of properties is a better indicator than total number of dollars.
Okay, so thank you, Katrina. So going on to B2, the petition, sorry. If I would just like to have a seconder, I'll move that we receive the corporate services report. Seconder, thank you, Ross. All in favour?
Aye.
Right, so moving on to B2, the official information.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to introduce Zoya Huxford, who's our information officer. Some of you may know Zoya, but if you don't, Zoya's background has been with the council now for some years. She's operating in the records and archive space, and from October last year, Zoya is full-time information officer, so she focuses on our official information and our Privacy Act requests, records and archives, and currently running a project around looking at our information and databases and how we use those internally. So Zoya is the author of the report, the analysis for this report. I can take us through it. I think it'd be useful for me to respond to some of Daphne's concerns around the background to the report first, and then I'll go through the report and then perhaps deal with some of the other issues as well that Daphne raised.
Just before we start, Karen, do you mind if I just recommend we receive the official request topic treatments report? I think we'll sit reader, all in favour?
Aye.
So just get that.
It's okay, otherwise we'll forget. No, that's fine. So the background to the report is there were a couple of meetings ago the committee did request that we have a look at the trends and to see whether there's any information coming from the trends for the topics that were requested and also the requests themselves. And that was largely around seeing what we can, just to understand what the background is and whether we can address particular issues that are coming up. And on a couple of those occasions, I did make some points that agree entirely with what Daphne had said today in public forum, that we needed to caution against any sort of looking at repeat offenders and potentially, I know that some councils have in the past released lists of people, organisations that have requested information many times for the reasons that Daphne quite rightly pointed out, that this is an important part of our democracy and ensuring that council is transparent and accountable, and it really isn't. And I completely take the point that Daphne makes that not everybody makes requests, and so it is important that people are able to do that. It can generate a lot of work for us, and there are mechanisms within council to address that, and sometimes, particularly as we'll report at the next meeting, there have been a lot of requests for information around rating. We'll report on that next time, and that's something that council has to address in terms of its capacity to meet those requirements. So the background to this report is, yes, it is important for us to understand what the trends are and who is requesting specifically, so that we can look at actually what we're doing and are there other ways that we can provide that information. If it's about particular issues, can we provide, as we have done with the rating information FAQs, put that information out onto the website. If there's particular areas of our service that is not doing terribly well, we might need to provide some more information around that. In terms of people, and I think I just wanted to pick up on the point that Daphne made in terms of vexatious and repeat offenders. There is the ability and the right for everybody to make requests under the Official Information Act. There are reasons for withholding information. Sometimes people, the points that I was making, sometimes people say about, well, they keep making requests and are they vexatious? The actual ground within the Act around vexatious is the actual request is vexatious rather than a person is vexatious, because otherwise it would undermine the purpose of the Act, of course. So it's so we have to be really clear on that. It's not about people ask too many times. If people are asking quite often, for example, in this case, we have somebody who's asked for over 10 times. Is there a better way that we can provide that information to that person? What's the nature of the issue? And we have in the past sat down with somebody to talk it through. What is it, our service? What can we do? What's the information that you're looking for, and how can we better provide that? So that's, I hope, an explanation, and I hope to address Daphne's concern with some comfort that certainly for officers and providing this information to council is certainly no intent to be named and shaming and identifying the offenders, and I hope that that's come through in the report. Do I have any questions on that before I just go into?
Not really a question, Karen. Thank you very much for that explanation. I totally agree with what you've said. And I support Daphne's submission that we need not automatically default to a what a pest response, because the OIA and Algoima are democratic functions balanced by individuals' rights under the Privacy Act, etc., and legal definitions of what constitutes grounds for declining a request. And I heartily support your approach to look for other ways to meet requests that may not fall within Algoima or be otherwise excluded, because as cumbersome as these things may be on a limited and financially constrained council, they are nonetheless a function of democratic process. I heartily support the work that you and Zoya are doing in this, and thank Daphne for her cautionary words. This is the way we are supposed to function, and if we can do things other than through the last resort of Algoima as a public dissemination of information, proactive circulation, etc., so much the better. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair. As stated in the report, there are 135 requests, yet the requests only add up to 85. So what are we missing? The number of requests that I can actually physically see in here add up to 85. Actually got 90 at one stage. So what are we missing out on?
I'm not sure where you've got number 85.
Well, you've detailed 3.111, there are 13 requests in that one. 3.1.2, there are
Some of those requests we had more than one request.
so I can see that you've detailed that, but it still doesn't add up. What am I missing?
My understanding was, and Zoe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Te-a-Waiti road was a specific matter, and there was 2 requests on that specific matter. The roading costs, there might have been more than one request on roading costs, but it was not just a very specific matter. It was just to give a brief overview of the other request. Yeah, so it's not supposed to add up. That's not saying that there's only one on roading costs and only one on Martinborough roads, or a number of those. But we put down 2 requests because it was a very specific matter about that road.
So when I'm a bit confused that when I receive a report that states 135, I'm expecting to see 135 items. I'm just.
I actually think it's really particularly reasonable. I think this is, remembering this is the first really detailed report we've had, and I commend you both for doing it.
And I appreciate the work that you're putting in there, but
I think you know, for example, roading costs, there could be 20 requests for that. I think the fact that we've got the total number of 135 and then split into sections, in my view, that's a perfectly reasonable way to express it.
What's the intent of it? Sorry to jump in, it was the intent, and that was the request to identify trends. If you would like a full breakdown of all of the requests, all of those 135 requests last year, we can provide that.
yeah, that would be appreciated. I'm expecting to see details. That's why we have a report. Sorry, Madam Chair.
Okay. What are anybody else's views on that? Would you like to see that in the report? Yeah, sorry.
I was going to comment. I was under the impression that any request that came in for information, whether it was labelled IA or not, was automatically treated as one. Is that correct?
Yes, so this is a representation of the request, picking up again on one of the points that Daphne made. So every request for information is a request under the Official Information Act, because everything is governed by the Official Information Act. We just deal with things in a different way. So if somebody phones up and says, when are my bins going to be picked up? That's a request for official information. We wouldn't obviously register that as an employment, we'd register it. It's just an inquiry, we can deal with it straight away. Also, service requests. Sometimes they're partly a request for information. We deal with those as a service request. Complaints and comments, again, are dealt with separately. What we register with official information requests is when it's gone into a little bit more than just being able to respond. Or if there's a clear matter that we need to deal with in a particular way and go through a particular process.
My point being that there's a huge number of requests over and above this one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that, I mean, is that
And we don't record them all. Up until now, up until
Yeah.
this year, we haven't also included media requests within the official information requests. And we report them, all right, so we're reporting them as separate because it's the media quite often that we need to respond very, very quickly to do that. But we need to
okay? Thank you.
Through you, Madam. Following off Garrett's comments, it kind of like gives us a better window into your world when we get an understanding of not only the request types, but also other stuff that, for the want of words, adds to your day. So
It's part of our day.
yeah, it's part of your day. So I suppose that's what we're trying to get around to, is trying to get a better understanding of all the requests that come through. Lagoin was a really great start, but I mean, these are things that we can, if there's a way to improve the process, that people are not.
Let's just be clear not to divert operational measures here. I don't think that's appropriate. I think what we did ask, and which in my view is an extremely good start, we asked for some sort of breakdown into trends and going forward how we might deal with that. And it could be in the outcome from this as we have perhaps frequently, broader category of frequently asked questions on the website, that kind of thing, broken down into categories, which may possibly diminish the number of requests. So that's what I say. I just think we need to be extremely careful not to dive into operational matters, which is not appropriate. Okay, so where to from here? I'm interested in how you might translate this into some useful comms or information, etc. So what are your thoughts or plans around that?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Chair. I was going to sit down with Sheil, our comms manager, to look at the trends and the areas. I know that she was already working on FAQs in a particular area, making sure that the website provides really useful information. And we've already started at rating information, but also looking at other areas that we could perhaps expand on. The information that we proactively put out, and so so we'll have a conversation about that. I think it's actually a useful story as well around the sorts of information that we are getting requests for. So we can certainly put some comment out after the meeting. The request stores, again, that's around just identifying, and we have identified particular members of the public that we will have conversations with separately to say that how can we provide this service. It's all information.
I think just with respect to questions that maybe repeated questions around the same subject. In my experience, sometimes you've got to hear a story told 3 or 4 times, maybe in a different way, until you actually completely understand the answers your questions. So I think that's just a normal way of looking at questions and how they're answered, and different people respond. So that needs to be taken into account.
Yeah.
It might be useful to use the rates next newsletter when you're at that point to perhaps put a commentary around there, say that this is what go into that section of the website for frequently asked questions.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Can I, if there's no other questions on the report, can I just pick up on a couple of other things that
Yeah.
you raised? It's on the topic. Completely take the point from Daphne around following up. I think Daphne's concern there was that maybe the information that's been provided back is either incomplete or it's not terribly helpful. And we are working as hard as we can to be on understanding what the nature of the issue is. So quite often people will ask for a specific document, and then from the rest of their request, you can understand that actually it's not necessarily that document they're after that will help them with the information. So it's trying to read between the lines and be as clear as we can be. And Zoya quite often goes back and confirms with people as to what actually it is that they're after, and if we can then provide. So providing better customer service and not being tied to the letter of what somebody's actually requested, and trying to get behind that and providing other information that they might not necessarily have requested that might also be help. So completely take the point on trying to be as helpful as we possibly can there. Proactive release, and I know that we have mentioned this a couple of times and that we are still working through our policy. Unfortunately, other priorities have taken us away from that particular area. The proactive, I'll just remind you that the proactive release policy is you have to give some careful thought around that, and this is what I communicated to Daphne way back when. When we respond to an official information request, we're protected from action under tort or provided information that can effectively sue us if they've requested the information. We don't have the same protection if we proactively release. So we have to be really mindful on what it is that we are releasing. So this might not necessarily be a request that somebody that we've responded to, it might be other information. So we always have to be mindful on what information we put out there. We have to be really careful that we're making sure that we're not releasing commercially sensitive information, for example. We don't have the permission, we haven't made sure we have the permission. So we have to go through those extra steps, and that's why there's a provision of sensitivity around it. So we are working through that. Quite often what councils do is release interesting official information requests. So we would, if there is some support somebody asks for that we know that would be interesting to other people, we could put that up as this is a response to official information requests. What we have been doing is we know that when we've got information requests in about particular topics that people are interested, we try and cover that through other comms, so that we have through other media release and providing information out to the public. But we are still working on that and getting that up. I think that's it. I think that's like the list of points I think that Daphne raised that I can address today. Publicly available database for OIA. So that was really that what we could do in terms of proactive release.
We've talked about training in this area. How are you going with that?
So we've provided the initial training. So everybody who comes in new, part of their induction, and Zoya takes them through official information. We are also, I think I advised at the last meeting, we are going to be providing Solomon put together a course on if you're new to local government, and within there's a component around official information, so all new people will be going through that course. We've identified particular members of staff who are frequently asked for information, and our frontline staff, and so we've provided more targeted advice and information to those officers. We've got our internal policy. We're at the moment translating what that internal policy is to be an externally focused policy, and that will be part of that proactive release. And you are currently putting together some more detailed information and training. So we're just working through that.
So compared to a year ago, thinking about progress and lifting, the way we handle these matters, can you see a significant shift or improvement?
I'm responsible for this area, so.
It's first of all, making it clear that any request that comes in certain categories of official information. It used to be literally unless someone wrote the whoever, that was what we got counted. So the process, the resourcing, our timeliness of response, my observation is it's been 100% improvement in terms of it's a significant way we have to respond to detail policy. And so, yeah, I respect my Karen's one.
No,
It's not appropriate to do that.
Thank you for that, and that's, you know, that's what we want to hear, so that's great.
There's always room for improvement, and we do, and I really appreciate Ross's, you know, and Ross's comments. I do appreciate the public such as that helping us to improve and telling us, you know,
Absolutely, absolutely.
because it is always about.
Well, I think it's a very good report. Thank you very much. We really appreciate that. I'm just going to move on to B3, the action bill. So I'd like to recommend that we receive the audit risk action items report. Second. Thank you. So first of all, does anybody have any comments on the actions, specific actions? Yes, Karen.
Yeah, just the 248 about solid waste. Are we going any further with this, talking about managing the landfill contracts? We are.
248, sorry, let me just check that. Is that the first one?
So this
Yeah,
is
it's the
regarding
first one.
Bonnie Glen.
Yeah, finally.
So I have verbally only had an update from solid waste manager to say that the consent for Bonnie Glen has been resolved, and we now are operating under a new 20-year consent. So I haven't closed this off because I haven't got the official response yet, but I'm expecting that will be closed off for the next meeting with an explanation.
So sorry, the 20-year consent to continue use of.
Yeah.
I think part of that action item though is to look at alternatives as well. So just the fact that the new consent, I'm just saying alternative avenues to dispose of refuse to be researched.
Prior to the contract ending.
Okay. Or perhaps is there a council action item report regarding waste mineralisation on the contract with City Care?
There was something about broken bottles or glass.
Oh, yeah, about the ability to adapt the contract. Do you think was going to go and look at it and see what was available, able to be done?
I think from my memory, the writer's comment that the contract was so watertight that it was.
It's prohibitive to change the contract.
We're going to do a new contract though.
Oh, absolutely, when it comes
So it'll
up.
still be up for grabs.
But I think.
Oh, it will be,
Yeah, right.
but
Sorry.
we've got another 4 years,
Yeah,
I
but
think.
what I think we raised in that last one, that may have been the council, but it's relevant to this, is the fact that we are having exponential increases in government levies, and we are operating under a contract that's 3 years old, which didn't anticipate this. And we just need a holistic view of that contract versus our obligations and rising costs. Because it's a very serious matter that if we can't look at a recycling plant in Marlborough, a change in the way we deal with waste in Featherston because of the contract.
The contract is based on tonnages though.
Yeah.
And so if internally we can get the community to reduce waste, then that will inevitably reduce our costs because our tonnage will go down.
Yeah, that's one aspect of it, but the other aspect is to, like saying, okay, we're tracking our, I think the example we used was we're tracking our glass to Auckland.
Yeah, from a climate change.
And they don't want to change that contract because that's part of an important part of their contract, but it's not necessarily ecologically friendly for us, from our waste perspective. I just wanted a clarity over what was possible.
This matter came up via assets and services.
Yeah.
Answers in about 3 different ways. So we have a contract and which is about the collection. And how the contractor then disposes of the waste streams is their responsibility, right? So if we, and this is reported, if we specified that we wanted, say, that waste stream to go to something else, that would impact on the supplier cost, and we would have to pay the supplier differently than we have. So our scope is for the collection and the disposal, because the contractor's responsibility to find the best place to dispose. If we substituted a requirement to dispose of waste in a certain way from where it's collected, that would change the nature of our contract. And that's been reported by assets and services. In your LTP, you lifted the cost of rubbish collection, the plastic bag cost, which is essentially to adjust for the levy costs for the ratepayer, and that pass on cost. So the levy issue is picked up through the changes in the costs of the rubbish bags from $1 to the $3.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harry, for those words, and I'll take it on board. However, do we not have the ability at the time of the contract renewal to discuss all that?
Absolutely.
When it's renewed, absolutely.
Yes.
Remember, we have a 7-year
Yeah.
contract, and we're in our second, and when the contract is a contract that is shared between Marston, Castle.
Combined
and
contract.
Absolutely. So we can renew all that at the time, pre to the renewal of the contract.
Like any contract.
But the comment about waste minimisation, we have a waste minimisation strategy. We are employing a solid waste officer, and we're out recruiting for that now. And that's to try and reduce the amount of waste that goes into the landfill in the first place. That's where the goal is. So if we can reduce the amount of waste that ends up at the landfill, that doesn't have to do with that contract. That's with our blush to actually manage and try and reduce demand.
Yep.
So has anybody got any comments down there? Sorry, Gary?
Oh, just on the last one, the 259, I'm just interested, we're in a tourism hat. Subscription databases, what do we mean by that? Do you mean clubs?
No.
If I remember correctly, this was to do with us having information sharing subscriptions like .loves data or Infometrics to allow them to correctly report on changes or fluctuations in tourism numbers, which we're not currently getting at the moment, or we may be, I'm not sure. It would be really handy.
Yeah, so we have part of our regional contract, Sense Partners providing our population forecasting data, and they also have other information available, and we could subscribe to a greater degree of information. So we have talked about this in the past as part of our planning, which is quite helpful. And so we just need to have a look at what their service is compared to Infometrics service and do a bit of comparison there and see whether that's a service we think is worthwhile.
I just think it's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, if VW tries to assess the impact or benefit of a campaign, then date-specific data becomes quite useful as opposed to annual data.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Right, okay, so we're moving on to B4, which is the final audit report. So I'd just like to receive the final audit report for the final financial year ended 30th June 2020. Can I have a second? Brenda? All in favour?
Aye.
Okay, I'm going to hand over to Katrina, but I would just like to make a couple of comments prior to that. I had a call from a ratepayer, section 4.4 of this, and Councillor West expressed some concerns. His comments, correct section. And this relates to the mayoral expenses, which in Audit New Zealand had highlighted that it was a beneficial option to change. I'd just like to say that I had this conversation with Katrina way back in May, and we at the time have altered the way we look at this. And it was the only concern was that it was a circular situation which wasn't ideal. So I've checked my dates, on the 12th of May, I went through all of Mayor's expenses going back to the beginning of the training. And they were very low and related only to mileage claims and parking fees. I was entirely happy with them and signed off. And subsequent to that, we've put in place that I can sign off with expenses, which, as I say, were minimal. So I'm completely happy and confident with past that aspect of the auditor's report. And
yeah, absolutely. So this is just a recommendation from the auditors. So what they look at is what our processes are and how they think that we could potentially improve them. So it's not about saying that our process was incorrect or was not sufficient. It was saying, well, actually, if you had a more direct separation of responsibilities between, and they felt that it was more appropriate that the chair of FAR was countersigning any expense claims for the mayor. So it's about a separation of duties, and it's literally about improving processes, which is what the auditors are here for. We decided to take that up, and just we did decide that would be a beneficial process to put in place. And look, I do apologise for the lateness of presenting this report. Obviously, it relates to last year's financial accounts. There was a delay in adopting this, and we didn't receive this report until I think it was February, and then I had forgotten to present it at the last FAR meeting, which is why it's been picked up and presented to this FAR meeting. So I do apologise for the delay in getting this to you. And it was just about us being sort of caught up with the long-term plan process, and it was just missed off and unintentionally missed off being presented to you. So are there any other comments around the report?
So just for clarification, this report, this audit report stems from last year, was received in February. Was received in February?
I think that's good.
Yet since May last year, the action item of 4.4 was prevalent then.
Sorry? I don't follow, sorry.
I'm sorry, what your question is. Are you asking if they brought up similar concerns?
No. New Zealand Audit sent the report in February, and we received it in February 2021.
Yep.
21.
So they picked up in 2021, February, that there was a discrepancy, a recommendation that we would consider. How do I put this? We would consider their suggestion of the mayor's expenditure. Are we saying that in May, we only went back as far as February?
No, we went back to the 1st of July.
Highlight that earlier.
1st of July when? 2020?
I went back for the whole
Okay,
day.
cool.
Oh, no, for the whole financial year.
The whole financial year.
Okay, no, that's good. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that just so I had it right in my head.
It just, going on from what Katrina said, this was only a recommendation.
Yeah.
It was not deemed critical, high risk or anything like that.
Not at
It
all.
was
No,
just
no, not at all.
to tidy it up, and we both agreed that it's a good thing and easy for me to do.
So that this poses one other question, which I did discuss with the chair. What other circular payments are happening that we may or may.
It's not a circular payment. I'm not sure I understand what you mean by circular payment.
What are the payments? What are the payments or expenditures that are being approved by the mayor and the CEO? Were there any other?
Well, any of the mayor's expenses.
Yeah. But that's just expenses. Are there any other sign-offs between the mayor and the CEO?
Well, the mayor is
value?
not able to raise purchase orders or enter into any contracts for service.
Yeah.
We're diving into operational measures.
No, I don't believe I am. I'm just querying if there's any way that we are able to identify any other payments.
Not that I'm aware of.
Cool.
And don't forget, we've got a lot of policies relating to expenditure, which we've gone through far, and it relates to a whole raft of areas.
The only expenditure that the mayor.
Through you, Madam Chair.
So
Those,
traditionally.
through you, Madam Chair, and I will not be interrupted on this, thank you very much. The delegations pertain to the staff, and the delegations don't necessarily pertain to MES.
So, do you want to anything further?
What, are you talking about financial delegations?
Yeah.
But you're correct, the mayor does not have any financial delegations, and this is what I was saying, but he doesn't incur expenditure when he travels. Okay, so Harry has been checking those when the mayor submits them, and Harry has been signing them off. Now the auditors are just saying, actually, a better process, a more improved process would be to have another set of eyes look over that for transparency, to make sure that there is no perceived over expenditure. Thank you.
I think we would consider that matter closed. Just thinking about some of the comments they do say necessary, 4.1, 4.2, 4.3. Can I see the updates on that?
Sorry, where are we looking?
These. Under 1.1 new recommendations. Just if you get the update.
They've all been implemented, publication, they've all been implemented. So publication of CCO's statement of intent, the latest statement of intent, which has just been issued, is now on our website. The survey, we all know about we made it clear in the long-term plan how frequent the survey would happen, and that's been addressed. And then you've got the expenditure one, which is beneficial. So that will be
Great.
Under 3, with regards to the Wellington water measures and reporting, are we confident that Wellington Water is addressing those specific issues?
So the answer is yes, and so we're confident they're addressing them.
yes.
But in terms of the qualification of the audit on a specific measure, they weren't able to take a corrective action, which was reported into part of the financial year. So, so they won't have 12 months in the next subsequent year of having that data corrected. So we're still in the same place, but it's because of the time lag between.
We're confident that they are going, that going forward from whatever date that they change their processes, that it's a compliant.
Yes, so yes, so that we're confident that the process for us, but in terms of its meeting the audit requirement for the financial year, the correction didn't occur to partway into it.
It was just that there was a comment from Wellington Water saying that they were challenging Audit New Zealand on some of these measures, but we just,
They lost.
cool, marks.
That applied to all of the.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yes.
All the Wellington Water.
Yeah, and they were, remember, just for your reflection, they were around response times.
Yes, yeah.
Recording of customer exponential.
If I could just pause for a second, it's 11:20 and Councillor Jackson, welcome.
Oh, yeah, and then I've got a punch up on my page.
Any more questions on this?
We're just discussing the audit report board, and I think if anybody doesn't have any further questions, I think we can move on to the next item.
Just a quick one. Do we have the Wellington Water Statement of Intent on our website?
Yes.
Right,
It should be.
gotcha. Just found it.
It might have been yesterday.
But yeah, it was literally just in the last 24, 48 hours.
Yeah, it was there yesterday.
Okay, so now I'm going to go to item C, which is a public excluded business. So the general subject of each matter to be considered while the public is excluded, the reason for passing this resolution in relation to each matter and the specific grounds under section 48(1) of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987 for passing of this resolution are as follows. Good reason to withhold exists under section 7 2A C F. So I would like to please ask for someone to second that. Thank you, Alex. Anyone in favour?
Yes.
Yes.
So we're now in publicly excluded. Thank you for coming along.
Sorry, John.